At the opening of the 18th century, Concord, Massachusetts, stood as a modest agrarian settlement within Middlesex County, organized around common fields, meeting-house governance, and clustered homesteads reflecting earlier Puritan town planning traditions established during previous 17th century decades. Geographically, the town lay along the Concord River and its tributaries, where fertile floodplains supported grain cultivation and grazing, while surrounding woodlands provided timber, fuel, and access routes connecting neighboring settlements and regional markets through seasonal paths and bridges. Daily life centered on subsistence agriculture, with households producing corn, rye, vegetables, and livestock, while modest surpluses entered local exchange networks, reinforcing a community economy dependent upon seasonal cycles, shared labor, and limited but steady interaction with nearby towns. The meetinghouse functioned as both religious and civic nucleus, where male property holders gathered to deliberate taxation, land division, and communal responsibilities, reflecting a political culture rooted in participatory governance within narrowly defined social boundaries shaped by property ownership. Throughout the early decades, Concord's population grew gradually through natural increase in migration, prompting periodic expansion of farmland and adjustments in land allocation, while maintaining continuity in social hierarchies that privileged established families and reinforced inherited authority within town institutions. Economic activity remained largely local, yet connections to the broader Atlantic economy emerged indirectly, as agricultural goods supported regional trade circuits that ultimately fed into colonial export systems tied to British mercantile structures and imperial regulations governing commerce. Household production relied heavily on family labor, including women and children, whose contributions in food preparation, textile production, and seasonal agricultural tasks sustained economic stability, though their roles remained formally unrecognized within official civic decision-making processes. Education developed slowly, with basic literacy encouraged for religious purposes, leading to the establishment of local schooling arrangements that emphasized reading scripture and maintaining moral discipline, reinforcing cultural cohesion and the transmission of shared values across generations. Relations with neighboring towns involved cooperation and competition, as shared resources such as grazing lands and waterways required negotiation, while overlapping claims and economic interests occasionally produced localized tensions resolved through customary practices and communal arbitration. Seasonal rhythms governed nearly every aspect of life, from planting and harvest cycles to winter maintenance tasks, creating a structured temporal order that aligned labor demands with environmental conditions and reinforced collective dependence on predictable natural patterns. Infrastructure remained minimal, with rough roads linking Concord to regional centers, limiting rapid communication but sustaining steady movement of goods and people, thereby integrating the town into a broader colonial landscape without fundamentally altering its rural character. Religious life retained strong Puritan influences, though gradual shifts toward greater denominational variation began to appear, reflecting wider changes within New England society as theological debates and generational differences subtly reshaped communal identity. By mid-century, land scarcity became more noticeable, as available arable plots diminished, leading younger generations to seek opportunities beyond Concord, contributing to outward migration that redistributed population while preserving the town's established social framework. Local governance continued through town meetings, where decisions reflected consensus among enfranchised men, yet this system also reinforced exclusion, as women, laborers without property, and marginalized individuals remained outside formal political participation. Agricultural practices adapted incrementally, incorporating crop rotation and improved land management techniques, which enhanced productivity but did not fundamentally transform the subsistence-oriented economic model that defined Concord's livelihood. Trade networks expanded modestly, with goods such as timber, livestock, and agricultural produce moving toward larger markets, linking Concord more firmly into regional economic systems while maintaining its primary identity as a farming community. Social cohesion depended on mutual obligation, reinforced through church membership, communal labor, and shared governance, though underlying inequalities persisted, shaping access to resources and influence within the town's hierarchical structure. External political developments within the British Empire gradually influenced local perspectives, as imperial policies and taxation measures introduced new considerations into town discussions, connecting Concord's residents to broader colonial concerns. Communication of news and ideas relied on travelers, printed materials, and regional networks, allowing information about political changes and economic conditions to circulate, albeit slowly, shaping awareness without immediate transformation of daily routines. As the 18th century progressed, generational shifts brought subtle changes in attitudes toward authority, property, and community obligations, indicating an evolving social landscape that balanced continuity with gradual adaptation. By the early 1770s, Concord remained fundamentally agrarian yet increasingly attentive to colonial grievances, as economic pressures and political developments fostered a growing sense of shared interest with neighboring communities. These cumulative developments established enduring patterns in governance, economy, and social relations, forming a structural foundation that would influence Concord's response to emerging conflicts, linking local experience to broader transformations within colonial New England.
During the early 1770s, Concord experienced increasing exposure to imperial policy changes as British taxation measures and administrative reforms reached even rural communities, shaping local discourse and gradually shifting attention from purely internal concerns toward broader colonial political developments. Merchants and farmers alike felt indirect economic pressure from imperial regulations, particularly those affecting trade and currency stability, as restrictions influenced prices, availability of goods, and the reliability of exchange systems that connected Concord to regional and Atlantic markets. Town meetings began to reflect heightened awareness of these pressures, with discussions extending beyond routine governance to include resolutions addressing colonial rights, taxation, and the perceived imbalance between local autonomy and imperial authority imposed from distant administrative centers. Printed pamphlets and newspapers circulated more frequently, bringing accounts of resistance from Boston and other towns, allowing Concord residents to engage intellectually with unfolding events and integrate external political narratives into their own community deliberations. Geographically, Concord's relative proximity to Boston, connected by established roads and river routes, facilitated the flow of information and goods, positioning the town within a corridor of communication that intensified its involvement in regional political developments. Local committees emerged to coordinate responses to imperial measures, organizing boycotts of certain goods and encouraging adherence to non-importation agreements, reflecting a collective economic strategy intended to assert colonial interests without immediate recourse to open conflict. Households adapted consumption habits in response to these agreements, reducing reliance on imported items and increasing local production, thereby reinforcing existing subsistence practices while aligning daily economic behavior with broader political objectives shared across the colonies. Social cohesion deepened through these shared efforts, as participation in collective resistance fostered a sense of unity, though underlying divisions remained, particularly regarding the extent and risks of opposing imperial authority within a system still tied to British governance. Militia organization gained renewed attention, with local training and preparedness becoming more structured, reflecting both long-standing traditions of communal defense and a growing recognition of potential conflict arising from escalating tensions between colonial and imperial authorities. Economic explanations for resistance became increasingly articulated, emphasizing the burden of taxation without local representation and the disruption of established trade patterns, which together framed imperial policies as both unjust and detrimental to colonial stability. Religious institutions also contributed to the evolving discourse, as sermons occasionally addressed themes of moral responsibility, justice, and community rights, reinforcing the legitimacy of measured resistance while maintaining an emphasis on order and restraint. By 1773 and 1774, events in Boston, including acts of protest and subsequent punitive measures, resonated strongly in Concord, prompting formal expressions of solidarity and concern as local leaders sought to balance prudence with participation in collective colonial responses. Political structures within the town adapted to these circumstances, with committees of correspondence and inspection taking on greater roles, extending governance beyond traditional town meetings and enabling more coordinated and timely responses to external developments. Communication networks became more efficient, with riders and messengers ensuring that news traveled quickly between towns, reducing delays and allowing Concord to remain informed and responsive within an increasingly interconnected colonial environment. As tensions escalated, the presence of British troops in the region heightened awareness of potential confrontation, influencing local planning and reinforcing the importance of militia readiness as a precaution against possible enforcement actions. Social consequences emerged as political alignment became more pronounced, with individuals and families expressing varying degrees of support or caution, subtly reshaping community relationships while maintaining an overall commitment to collective decision-making processes. Agricultural routines continued, yet were